Hello, and thank you for joining today's COVID-19 Recovery Network panel event. My name is Holly, and I'm part of the professional development team here at IIRSM. Your host today is IIRSM Fellow Hugh Maxwell. Before I hand over to Hugh, there are just a few things to run through first. So to begin with, you should see to the right of your screen a toolbar with various options. As the microphone shows, you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar. If you need any support using GoToWebinar, the I symbol will take you to our support site. And we have selected some of the most popular questions received for our panel in advance of the session today to respond to. Feel free to post any further questions in the questions area, and we will try to get to these too. Any unanswered questions will be covered in a Q&A document to be posted on the IIRSM website after the 3 COVID-19 panel events have taken place, along with additional resources and information. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be placed on the IIRSM YouTube channel after the event. Okay, that's enough from me. Hugh, over to you.
Thanks, Holly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's attending, wherever you are in the world. My name's Hugh Maxwell. I've got over 30 years experience in management. I've been a fellow of the IIRSM since 2007, and I've got a very strong interest in, obviously, the impact that COVID's had to date, but going forward even more, trying to share timely and effective solutions based on the learnings of experts in their field. As I said, I've been a fellow of the IIRSM since 2007, and when I was offered this opportunity, I was really pleased to be able to be engaged in such an exercise with such a varied bunch of experts from different industries, disciplines, and with different backgrounds. So first and foremost, I'd like to say a big thank you to Holly, to Claire, and to Susan and the IIRSM team for making this happen and for their work in establishing this. But equally more so, I'd like to say a big thank you to our panelists, Teresa, Caroline, Michael, Melissa, and Robert, all of whom you're going to learn a bit more of and listen and learn hopefully from with their experience and knowledge in a while. So this network has basically been established to allow us all to discuss, debate, and share our experiences and share any questions we have in terms of what current challenges we face and what the future may have in store and what potential strategies we can put together by sharing ideas, concepts, and practices that others around the globe have actually put into place to deal with this challenge. The network was basically established by us in order to try and assess and understand better some of the uncertainties around COVID and its health and safety impact on the economy. And what we have pulled together over a series of 3 initial network events, webinars, is expertise from a number of ranges of fields such as business continuity, strategic planning, career preservation, really important, stakeholder management and effective communication, and something that sometimes gets underplayed, mental health well-being, the impact of travel, and the long-term impact in terms of working practices such as working from home. So those are just some of the things that we'll be looking at. We've got, as I said, a multidiscipline, cross-functional set of experts who are here to help us. Our objectives being that we can prepare ourselves better for the future, we can raise the actual importance of the pertinent risks of COVID amongst people who we may need to influence and be stronger with in terms of getting their buy-in to the importance of not just what we're doing today, but how we prepare and change our focus in the future. And I like to think that what we're doing falls nicely in line with the mission and values of IIRSM in terms of the panel we have. We're looking for an open discussion, debate, sharing ideas and sharing practices that have gone well, not so well. Some of the solutions we're trying to come up with are going to be authentic, as we are in terms of engaging experts from their own fields in trying to provide feedback. We hope to give effective advice, effective solutions to the questions that our attendees are putting forward. And clearly the focus going forward, not just this event, is to try to share knowledge and share practices in things that are meaningful, not just to the membership of our IIRSM, but to businesses and industries further afield. So that, as I said, there are 3 events. The panelists will change. Some of the questions that have been put forward already will actually be held back for future events where we may have different panelists who may have more specialist knowledge in those areas. So please don't think the questions are being overlooked. The sessions will be taped and recorded, available both through the IIRSM website and YouTube channel, as will all of the questions and answers that we put together. So without further ado, I'd like to say once again a big thank you to our panelists, and I'd like to do a round table now to introduce you to each of the panel. Ladies first, I'm a big believer in. So I'd like to start with most of us are in Europe with the exception of Caroline. So if we could hand over to Caroline first to introduce yourself, please. Sorry, in England, not you. You're in Europe, yes?
Yes. Yes, I'm in Europe. Okay. Well, thank you very much for organizing this, IIRSM, to Hugh for being the moderator in this panel, and to everybody else for organizing it. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be together with everybody else who's an expert in their field. I hope we'll contribute and make some comments that are of interest to you. I believe we will. My background is crisis management. I've been in crisis management for 30 years. Working around the world across industries, mostly for multinationals. I do have experience in working from home, and we can talk a little bit about that in a while. We've always focused on anticipation, prevention, mitigation, and recovery. And I believe that there's a big difference between a crisis and a reputation train wreck. And those are the types of things that make a big difference in how you recover from crises. Now, the pandemic that we are living now is on a different scale. It brings in different challenges for everybody. Everybody's affected, but everybody's affected in very different ways. And I hope that that's one of the things that we're going to be exploring today for everybody's benefit. Thank you.
Sorry, I think it was
Hugh,
muted
I think you're on
there.
mute. Yeah.
Melissa, yeah?
Good. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Mark, and I'm really glad to be part of this panel, getting the opportunity to share with others and learn from others on how we navigate these challenging times where we've all gone through different aspects of COVID, and it's going to have long-lasting impacts on businesses and individuals and our home lives. So I have 20 years of experience, mainly in the oil and gas industry, and I moved to the UK a year and a half ago, and a new member to IIRSM. So really fortunate to be part of this panel discussion. During COVID, I've changed roles, I've changed home locations, so not a main challenge compared to others, but still navigating my way and now working on a site that was deemed a critical operation. So it stayed online during the lockdown period. So looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Melissa. Look forward to your impact. Now, a close friend of mine, Teresa, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thanks, Hugh. Hello, everyone. My name's Teresa Swinton, and I'm the owner and founder of Paradigm Human Performance Limited. First thing I want to say is I'm obviously having a bit of a wardrobe malfunction today because you probably can't see me. I have actually got colour, believe it or not, normally. So apologies for that. The sun's just decided to shine on me. So I'm very, very excited to be part of this panel. Certainly, as I say, with knowing Hugh and also Robert, it's great to see Robert on here as well. And during the period of the COVID sort of pandemic and the lockdown, we've been helping our clients to make sure that they've got the capacity to continue their business as normal as has been possible. We work with a lot of client organisations in safety critical infrastructure, safety critical industries such as water, gas, utilities, electric power, so on and so forth, and construction. So our clients basically kept working when other organisations were locking down. So we've seen some of those challenges with our clients, and we've helped them to navigate the sort of sometimes choppy waters and the confusing information that has been coming out of governments, not just in the UK, but also in the USA and across Europe as well. So really, really proud to be here. Thank you very much. And again, I will just say, I'm wearing a baseball cap because 2 weeks ago I shaved my head for charity and I didn't want to frighten everyone. So please forgive me. It's just a complete wardrobe nightmare day. Thanks, Hugh.
Thanks, Teresa, and you're still beating me on the hair stakes. Thank you so much. Can I ask now, Michael, could you introduce yourself, please, sir?
Of course. Thank you, Hugh, and hello, everybody. My name is Michael Lavery. I am the CEO and the owner of Brand and Reputation, and it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's a national and international consultancy in the areas of brand, marketing, and communications. I've previously worked as a marketing director and an executive director in the private and the education sectors. And throughout that time, I've never been far from a crisis. Communications guys are often very close to this, as you know. So lots of experience of crisis communications, supporting crisis management and incident management. And that's been in all different sectors, from working on a, a major explosion at a power plant, an Enron power plant in the UK, to working with the NHS here in the UK and with universities throughout the world, and particularly in the UK, the university sector is very much in the news today as it responds to some chaotic planning around assessments of A levels and GCSE results. So yeah, never far from a crisis, as I help to raise my clients' profiles, but also through communications, manage their reputations internally and externally.
Thanks for that, Michael. Look forward to your input. And last but not least, Robert, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Hugh. I'm Robert Dukes, Health, Safety and Environment Manager at Waxcycle. We had a start to the pandemic by having a request from the NHS to supply them with hand sanitizer. So we done a full production swap, which included an FMEA and a HAZOP, and then we, not on top of managing a pandemic, actually supplied the NHS with hand sanitizer as well throughout the crisis.
Thanks, Robert. Again, panelists, a big thank you to you all. I'm sure your knowledge, expertise, experiences and skills are going to prove invaluable, not just today in the questions that we have to field, but also through the subsequent sessions, and also through what support we can provide as a group to the requirements of our stakeholders. So at this point, I don't want it all to be one way. We would like to see really and get an idea as to how this current situation has actually impacted on the wider community out there. At this point, can I ask you, Holly, to support us? I believe you're going to be taking a poll with our attendees for us.
Yep, sure. So I've just launched the poll now, and I'll leave it up for a few moments whilst people can vote. I'll leave it up for 5-10 seconds or so more.
So please share your input, vote on this. We will be sharing the results of the poll, having fielded the questions that have been put forward. So your input is most welcomed.
Okay, and I'll share the results now. So we had 6% have always worked from home, 56% are now predominantly working from home, 28% have returned to the workplace, and 11% have been working at their usual location throughout.
So really that's saying to us that 90% of our attendees have, in many respects, had some impact in terms of the effect of COVID, in terms of their place of work, obviously surrounding that, how they get through their working routines, their home routines as well. Because we sometimes forget that it's going to impact not just on the mental welfare of you at work, but how you cope with having the kids or the 4 cats at home, or like my Max, who likes to bark. You may share a bark or two from later. I do try and isolate him when I'm doing these calls. But all of these things add to the added pressure. And I think it's important, we try and share with people and help to prepare them as much as possible to deal with these situations. So what we have planned now, we've actually already asked a number of the potential attendees and attendees to share with us some questions. And the IIRSM team have put together 6 key questions we'd like to focus upon first. And if time allows it, we're going to further their depth. The first question I'd like to share with you is from Douglas Porter, who's based in the UK. And the point that Douglas has shared with us is, many of us have been working from home during the crisis. Wouldn't it be better to use the term back to business as opposed to recovery? Caroline, can I ask you to give us your thoughts and inputs there, please?
Of course, thank you. Well, it's interesting because I founded my firm, CSNA International, 30 years ago, coming January. And I started with a partner, and we initially worked from home, and we worked from home because it was at the time just a way to keep costs down. Always thinking that actually our clients would say, there's no way that you can keep doing this, where's your office? It never happened. So 30 years later, my team everywhere around the world is still working from home, and we've grown since then. And so we were used to it, it wasn't new. However, working from home in lockdown is not a normal working from home. So some of the things that we had to deal with had to do with the pressures of not being able to go out, not being able to meet with people, having no social interaction. So it's not so much the working from home, it's those restrictions. So for instance, one of my colleagues has a young baby. Well, the young child couldn't be in a daycare. He had to be at home. His wife and him were alternating, trying to look after the child. That gave them a lot of pressure. A couple of our other younger colleagues were lacking the social interactions that younger people need. A lot of people in certain parts of the world where we started, like in Hong Kong, operate from very, very small apartments with extended families living in the same place. So I think what I'd like to say is that the working from home that everybody's experienced, and since basically February, March, is not the normal working from home, and it has given working from home a really bad and distorted rap. Because if you're working from home in normal conditions, there's no reason you can't meet colleagues for lunch. There's no reason you can't have a coffee with a friend in between. There is no reason you can't go out and work in a park for a while because you want fresh air. So I think we need to really restore this, and it has impacted different people in different ways. Now, I'm also very cautious of the back to business or returning to the office. I think after this COVID-19 situation, I don't think we can talk about going back. I think we need to talk about going forward. And yes, there are people who would like to go back to the office because they miss the physical interaction of working with other colleagues in the office, or because their home working conditions are not optimal. And I think organizations need to be flexible. I believe that going forward, a lot of developers are going to change the way they build buildings, and they're going to be shared working spaces, not only in fancy condos, but in every building, so that people have very good internet access and they can work in a separate area from their own tiny apartment, as an example. So I think we need to talk about looking forward. In my case, with my team, we were able to continue to work from home. What we did do is we spent quite a bit of time looking after the emotional and social needs of some of our team members who felt really isolated, not because they were working from home, but because of the lockdown.
Thank you for such an in-depth answer. That's really appreciated. Now, you have some views as well about uncertainty bias as well?
Yes, so
worth waiting here.
The big stress, and I've written quite a bit about this in different articles since COVID started, the big stress comes from something which is called uncertainty bias. So the uncertainty bias is uncertainty about everything. Am I going to get sick? Will a family member of mine will be sick? Will I lose someone? Will I lose my job? Will I be able to return back to the office and have a normal lifestyle or a normal split of my schedule? this COVID-19 situation, because it's global, because everybody's been impacted, albeit in different slightly different phases, and there's no end in sight. We do not have a vaccine yet. You can see right now there are second waves. Hong Kong is experiencing a third wave. Korea is having a massive resurge of cases, even though they had it really under control thanks to their fantastic and efficient testing. So this uncertainty is causing a certain bias, which is affecting the way we are experiencing it. We are constantly living with uncertainty. A lot of people are talking, as now analysis around sleeping patterns being disrupted, people having more nightmares, waking up during the night. So this uncertainty bias, even if you are in optimal conditions, and I can say myself, I feel that I have no young children at home. I have a big space. Even during lockdown, I could sit in my garden. So I did not feel stressed. I was used to this. But the uncertainty, of course, is causing stress on everybody, including, you know, if you're a consultancy, will I be able to get through this period? Will I have enough clients? It's interesting that everybody says, well, you're in crisis, surely you have a lot of work. We have a lot of work in certain areas, but other areas have completely stood still. So the uncertainty bias is what's causing a lot of pressure on everybody in different ways.
Thanks for sharing that, Caroline. I think a lot of people share that, but sometimes aren't prepared to put it on the table and recognise that as a real factor going forward. Any other members of the panel like to share any views on this question? Teresa, please.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. The only thing that I would have added really is, you know, in relation to the question about, you know, should we be using the term going back to business? I think it's really important to recognise that with the majority of people that we have had working from home, how successful we've all been in continuing our business. So I think, you know, when we talk about going back to work or back to business, we do need to be sensitive to the, you know, to pick up on Caroline's points about how people are feeling as they come back into the workplace. They're not feeling, the majority of those people are not feeling like they've been on holiday or they've had time off. Indeed, you know, certainly my experience is that some of my clients, staff have been working longer hours, you know, than they would work if they were physically in the office. It's, you know, Zoom call to Zoom call to Zoom call with no breaks in between. So I think, yeah, it's very, very important to acknowledge that there's a different environment, that we may be going back into a workplace, but back to business. You know, I'm obviously there are some organisations that have been massively disrupted by COVID, but for those of us who have had people working from home, I think it's important to acknowledge the effort and the commitment that they've shown to us, and recognise that we have been able to continue with our business because of their efforts.
Thank you for adding that, Teresa. I think it's very worthwhile and a very solid point to say just how well people have done. I think that in many respects has impacted on really reducing the impact of the recession and on reducing the impact on a lot of major businesses as well. So, my friends, if there's no further points to raise, oh, sorry, Caroline.
I think also Melissa would like to say something. I want to add something here. That's really important, echoing on what Teresa said. The Zoom or, you know, GoToMeetings or Teams or whatever platform is being used, technology has allowed people to have these face-to-face encounters, virtual face-to-face encounters. It is absolutely true and is now proven that the attention span required in a 1-hour Zoom call or Teams, because of the multiple faces that we have to look at, is 10 times more tiring than a normal meeting face-to-face. There is a slight time lag. It requires, you see your own picture, you see other people. It's a very complicated interaction. Now, what is happening is that during lockdown, people had such a craving for these contacts that they automatically went into these video conference meetings just to have that virtual physical presence. In reality, a lot of these calls could have just been done on the phone or by email, and that's going to have to go back. So Zoom, GoToMeetings, Teams, whatever platform you're using should be used for meetings that really require that interaction. In a lot of other cases, you could place a call. And indeed, I totally agree. If you have 4 to 6 calls on Zoom or on a platform per day, it is exhausting. And yes, I do believe that working from home for the majority of people has been much harder and much more tiring than what would normally happen. So indeed, going back to work is a bit of a misleading statement. And I think it's maybe going back to a balanced way of working as we come out of this gradually over the next 6 to 12 months, hopefully.
Sorry, Melissa, I can see your hand there now. Please contribute. I look forward to your input.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Hugh. I just wanted to touch on an item that Teresa mentioned about like back to business. So there have been many companies that have continued working. So I'm working at a site where they did not shut down. And so there's also recognition of the thousands of employees who have continued working and bringing on, critical supplies, if it's food, beverages, or even like oil and gas operations. Many of them haven't shut down. That has had some implications as well. So in terms of the going back to business, it's just that balance that there are some who have continued to ensure essential services continued. And I was listening to another webinar, and the person had mentioned about build back not only better, but exponentially. So I think there's also an opportunity to take the insights and learnings from COVID around how we work going forward, the sustainability benefits that we've seen as a result. So it's not back to what it used to be. There is it's going build back better, but also in recognition of, those critical resources that have continued to work non-stop over these last 5 months.
That's that, Melissa, and that brings us into this whole new field that people are actually recognizing, both in terms of personal and organizational resilience. So I think you've made some really good points there, my friends. Thank you so much. So we move on to the next question, so we can share some views and get some more impact from the rest of our panel. So question 2, I don't have a name for this one. Oh, sorry, I do tell a lie. I tell a lie. Alan Everett from the UK, it's my scrawl. Can employers insist on a return to the work environment? Anybody on the panel got any views there? Caroline, Teresa, or Michael, perhaps? Start with you, Teresa, please.
Sorry about that. Yes, so I think there's a fine line to be trodden between insisting on people coming back into the workplace and actually wanting people to come back in the workplace at the moment. So again, taking a risk-based approach to who we're having back in the workplace is extremely important at this point in time. I think inevitably there are people in our organisations that we have to insist that they come back into work. And then, I know that you've got other panel conversations with psychologists and specialists in those fields who will come on and talk about managing personal resilience and mental ill health. So I don't really want to comment on that because it's not my expertise. However, we do have to take the view that we have to be in business. We have to keep providing gainful employment for our employees. So we do need to get people back into work. The important thing that we've been working through with our clients is making sure that as they do start to bring people back in, those people do feel safe in their environment. So if you can maintain the social distancing, then that's fantastic. If you are insisting on, and I think most of us are now, insisting on the wearing of PPE such as face masks, then you absolutely have to make sure that as a leadership team you're reinforcing that so that there are no exceptions. Where there are exceptions, so for example, people who have an exemption from wearing a face mask, to either really consider, do they actually need to be back in the workplace? And if they do, then they may need to be managed through your existing occupational health processes, but also just making sure that we've got the right people in the workplace and that we're not just taking a blanket approach and saying bring everyone back in, that we take that risk-based approach now from the perspective of the individual, as in people who are shielding or quarantining at home or who are showing symptoms, but also from our operational risk perspective as well, and enabling ourselves to retain a level of business that keeps us going, keeps us surviving.
Thank you for that. Excellent. Robert, your hands up. Do you want to add some points, or are you stuck?
Yeah, no, what I would say is it's a great opportunity to, if you're engaging with your workforce and there's one or two there that have some issues with regarding mental health, or you really want to get back in the office, that's a great opportunity to get them back in. So what I would say is use your communication skills, your engagement skills, and identify who might be at risk or who would be best to get in sooner, as based on a mental approach to people that are remote working that might be struggling.
That's a good time to come in. Michael, who was our expert in the area of communication, please, sir, what are your views on this?
Thank you, and thanks, Robert, for that perfect intro to communications, which is very much going to be the theme of most of my contributions today. Amplifying the points that Teresa and Robert have made, I think it's really important that we provide clarity and that we're consistent with the information that we give to our employees. And there is existing guidance out there from health organisations, from governments, whether that's your national or your local government. But I think we also need to be encouraging our employees to engage fully with our organisational policies and standards and expectations, because we need to provide a really clear framework to allow our employees to feel comfortable to return to work with the right precautions and restrictions. As Teresa said, there is the occupational health system of referrals that we would adopt in any other circumstances when we're looking to reintroduce employees to our working environment. So I think let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's look at our organisational policies and values. Let's look at our occupational health and risk assessment plans that we already have in place. How might they be adapted to respond to the particular challenges around managing the COVID pandemic? But let's be really clear to ensure that our employees are engaging with our policies and have clarity about what's expected of them and what support will be available.
That's great, thank you. And Caroline, what can you add on that point? Because I know that you've got some strong...
Well, I completely agree with everything that Teresa and Michael and Melissa said. I think Teresa earlier talked about those people that were critical infrastructure that continued working. I think they provide a very good example of what works and what doesn't work, and should be considered as models for how we can do things in organizations that are now slowly, gradually allowing people back into the workplace. And beyond that, there's a number. Okay, the challenge with communication is that you could go with the poster campaigns, you can do a number of things that people may or may not follow. Since this started, obviously, there's a couple of tools that are out there that I think are really useful. One is apps that provide employees guidelines on what to do, that provides the organization a way to check and reinforce key messages and good practices. Secondly, beyond the apps, it's also taking stock of what has worked and what hasn't worked. And if you can do also, in the case of, to make it user-friendly, use an app to do an easy assess so that you can actually assess what has worked, what has not worked. And you could do that across your management teams if you have multiple locations, and try to keep the best practice, share that best practice, and do a bit of a correction. So there's, beyond the policies and the guidelines that are at national levels and can be different from country to country, there's also a best practice out there that's coming out of those that already continue to work during this period, and those that are taking stock of what has worked and what. It is not going back as it was. It is going forward in a new and better way. I do think that senior management has a big role to play, and I've heard of quite a few clients where all the senior managers are back in the office. So if you're an employee and you know that your bosses are in the office, even if you don't feel safe, you're going to go back to the office because you feel that, oh my God, they're going to think I'm just taking a holiday because I continue to work from home. And that has to be really brought to the attention of senior management, that it's not because they want to go back to work, that it is the way to do it, because it may send the wrong signal. People may feel that if they don't go back, they'll be invisible, and they'll be passed for promotion. So there's a lot of things that go on both sides of that communication from top management down, and how employees are also feeding back to top management in terms of what's working and what tools they can use to make it better.
That's a solid answer. Melissa, do you have something to add?
No, so totally agree in terms of the considerations of the optics and the communications and the messages. And so I mean, one of the questions was about like a risk assessment required for, you know, a longer time of working at home, and those are some of the things that will need to be considered in that that risk review.
Okay, well, should we move on to that question now? As you said, one of the questions that we were fielding as part of this session today: should a risk assessment be carried out for staff who are now working from home until next year, especially their workspace? Should we include psychological risks, and if so, how should these be assessed? Can we start with you, Melissa, and then perhaps ask Robert for his?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So, so as I mentioned, risk assessment should have been done already for the changed situation that we've been through for the last 5 to 6 months. And if not, then now is the opportunity to do that. If it is that there is going to be a longer term working from home, those risk assessments need to be revised to take this new situation into account. And things like ergonomics, fatigue management, mental health and well-being, performance anxiety are some of the things that will need to be considered. So I know Caroline has touched on this already. Mental health and well-being is becoming so critical in terms of the people who are working from home, even the ones who are back at the office, and it will require significant consideration and control. So it needs to be a focus area for all companies going forward. In terms of what should be in the risk assessment, there are lots of available resources. That's one thing I do have to say I admired with the various networks and associations. We've all come together to provide resources across the companies. So things like the hsc.gov, World Health Organization website has a lot of good resources. IIRSM COVID-19 resources, and of course IIRSM. I know the recent Sentinel magazine has several articles that talks about considerations for you know, risk assessment, controls, mental health and well-being, things like emotional intelligence, the importance of leadership and leadership presence, and what, you know, the expectations leaders would set now, and things like checking in on people who are working from home. So this is a big area, and it will require constant review of your risk assessment. So at my site, for example, we did a risk assessment for continuing work during this period, because as mentioned, we hadn't shut down, and we refresh that pretty often through engagement and conversations and feedback with personnel. So this is something that's going to be dynamic. It's going to continue until we have a vaccine, and maybe even after, because there will be mental health and well-being impacts long after we've had a vaccine.
Thanks for that, Melissa. And Robert, have you got anything further to add from your experiences there, please?
Yeah, so definitely on a risk assessment, obviously DSE assessment as well. So my favourite way with DSE assessments is to engage the workforce. So I'll ask them to do like a self-DSE assessment based on some training that we provide, because I want to get what their feedback is. I recognise it's their home. And then we'll provide, you know, we'll ask them for a picture of their work setup. We'll look at that. we'll assess it, and then what we'll do is we'll provide equipment and support around what they've said that they have any issues around, but then also what we also have identified, like, you know, have they got the right setup? Do we need to do anything around that? Then I'm just going to touch on the mental health aspect. I think that's a massive one. I think we're going to see certainly a rise in mental health issues around the home working. So one of the things that we've been doing is working with our team leaders and our line managers, just to do like a weekly catch up, a daily catch up, and we basically give them simple questions to ask, you know, do a self reveal on some of the issues that they're facing. So it might be like, oh, I've got some issues with the kids. You know, how are you finding the pandemic? How are you finding this? And the self reveal is quite important to get stuff out of people. And if you identify any problems there, it could be anything. I remember a seminar the other week on domestic violence, and he was saying that there's an increase in domestic violence due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's trying to identify anything like that, but also not ask outright to put them in a situation that might put them on the spot. But it's just kind of making sure that anything like that, you've taught your line managers, and you're working with your line managers to try and identify any problems with the team and any support that you can put in place around that as well. I think that's probably about it, really, Hugh.
I think you might have been on mute there, Hugh. Are you on mute still?
Sorry, yes, I had a bit of a flicker there with my connection at home. The weather's not been the best. Melissa, you have something else to add?
Just to add back on the mental health piece, I think, yeah, it is an increasing focus area. So some of the resources that I think are available are mental health awareness training, but also consideration for having mental health first aiders in your organization, like how we have physical first aiders, now having that, and it really needs to become part of a company's set of programs so that we can provide support, start to see the initial signs of stress and be able to provide that initial support.
And Michael?
Thanks, Hugh. Just again to add to that, in terms of the clarity of information we provide to our employees, I think we need to maintain that supportive and very open dialogue. We have to ensure that there are structured opportunities for feedback, that line managers and supervisors are accessible. So it might be that there's a particular time of day or a time in the week, almost like a clinic, where people can go to their senior manager to ask for support, and also that we don't panic as professional colleagues here and try to reinvent the wheel. We can signpost our employees to existing professional established advice. Now that might be from partners like NHS, from mental health charities, but also many of our organisations will have relationships with counselling services. We can direct employees through their trade unions to access, again, counselling and support. Perhaps some of us have chaplaincy services, that kind of thing. So again, it's about not reinventing the wheel, but about mapping the partnerships and the links that we already have and signposting employees to where they can get support, rather than thinking that we have to, putting ourselves under pressure to be reinventing the wheel.
Thank you for that, Michael and panel. And I think, the important point coming out of there is the fact that risk management, we all have a part to play, all stakeholders. It's not purely the fact that it rests on the lap of senior management or line management. And in all future lockdown and similar crises, it's really important that we all prepare as best as we can, physically, mentally, and we all contribute, not to the problem, but we all try and contribute to being part of the solution, be it short term or longer term. Now, one of the questions I held back because I thought it'd give us a lot of fuel to answer with, I'd like really to pitch this one first and foremost to Teresa, but what the question is, what skills should we be developing to help us to manage such future crises and to prepare ourselves better? Teresa, could you share your thoughts on this one, please?
Yeah, absolutely. This is such an important question, really, and I want to take this from the perspective of the organisational perspective. So the skills that we need to be developing through this, and the lessons we need to be learning from this, is how to build our capacity in the future to fail safely. So a number of picking up on what Michael said and also Melissa said about the array of information that's available in terms of becoming a learning organisation. If you have embraced those principles during this period, you will absolutely be thriving, because suddenly organisations that wouldn't normally talk to each other and share are sharing openly. Society has come together as one community to try and overcome this pandemic. So there is so much learning. There are so many free webinars. There are papers out there that you could spend days and days just reading and learning from what the best organizations have done, and not just what they've done well, but what they've done pretty badly as well. So for me, this is about a time to think about the skills that we need at the organizational level, because undoubtedly, you know, from what we're hearing, COVID it's not going to be here and gone. This is going to be with us for some time as we move forward. And indeed, it's sort of, you know, again, going back, this may be something that we just have to normalize around in the future by handling this through some form of occupational health screening system. But we have to find a way now to live and operate with COVID in our businesses and in our families, I think. So one of the biggest challenges that we saw with our client organisations at the start of this was, well, two things really. The first thing that they did was, it was almost like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction where, as I said, we work with safety critical industry. So they kind of said, right, okay, well, we'll send anyone who's office-based home, and we'll keep field-based staff operational, and we will look at, you know, maybe basing them from home where they don't have to go into a depot to collect their vehicles and things like that, which was an appropriate thing to do. However, then where we came unstuck was where we had expertise that was sitting at home, and that expertise where it understood how the business actually operates, how the tasks get completed, how the decisions get made, how a particular machine works. And suddenly we had furloughed or sent home our expertise, and now it was left to you know, people without the experience or without the knowledge to try and manage our business through that. So that was the first thing that we saw. And again, what we've been working with our client base to say, understand from this, who are the experts? If you're a manufacturing organization, you have experts on a production line, recognize who they are. They may not have manager or leader in their job title, but for some reason they may be a subject matter expert. Recognize them and understand the importance of keeping them in the workplace, or at least keeping them in contact to help you with some of that operational decision making. Then the second thing was that for those organisations that did have business continuity plans or emergency plans that were, you know, fairly well thought through, and some of our clients did indeed have contingency plans in place for a pandemic and things like that. Once you've exercised and you are working in this new normality of, you know, working within the confines of your contingency plan or your emergency arrangements, suddenly your capacity to fail safely beyond that is eaten up. So what we found was that some of our clients who were really now low on resource were making decisions based on, you know, to the best of their ability. And then when a normal day-to-day crisis came along, such as a workplace accident or an incident, they had no capacity to deal with it. So therefore, the impact of that on the organisation was greater than it ever would have been during normal business. So again, contingency plans to the contingency plans are going to, I think, become the norm. Having a pandemic plan in place and retaining contact with our subject matter experts is going to be very important. And that, you know, if you did have a contingency plan and it didn't work well for you this time around, review it. If you haven't already, think about it again, think outside of the box. And if you didn't have a contingency plan, hopefully by now you've got one in place. And again, there are organisations out there I know that are helping. If you do a Google search for a COVID contingency plan now, there's a whole array of these huge, phenomenal organisations who are sharing their learning. So that's really my message from COVID, is take the learning that's out there and learn as an organisation how to learn. That's very important. Thanks, Hugh.
And Caroline, you getting further to that, please?
Yes, thanks, Teresa. I think it's very important to make a difference between business continuity and business contingency planning and crisis management and crisis response. Business continuity is scenario-based, so we can have a pandemic plan. It is designed to make sure that the organization can continue its activities. It does not give the management team the skills, the competencies needed to manage the uncertainty of a crisis. And that cannot be scenario plan. A crisis plan is never scenario plan. It has to be able to fit in terms of competency development, whatever crisis and adversity is going to be thrown at you. So we looked into this already quite a while ago, more than 10 years ago, and developed a crisis management competency protocol. One of the critical things that crisis team need to have is the ability to, on the one hand, you have a plan, but the ability to recognize that the situation is probably going to get worse before it gets better, and that you need flexibility and thinking out of the box and a whole raft of crisis leadership competencies to help you navigate this and keep holding that course all the way through the end. Now, a number of organizations consider this not just a nice to have, but a must have. Those organizations that we've worked with that have in and out, pandemic, no pandemic, have put these things in place, have practiced, have trained as teams, have understood that it's not a bad week at the office. A crisis is not a bad week at the office. And therefore have trained for certain skill sets that are not normal leadership skill sets. Those organizations can deal and obviously probably have the flexibility and the adaptability to survive, not only survive, but possibly even emerge from the crisis stronger than before. So I think it's important to recognize that you need the business continuity plans, yes. You need the contingency plan, yes, and you'll have to review them and modify them as time goes along. How many organizations have pandemic plans in place that they didn't even look at for HR, for SARS, for H1N1, and didn't even look at them, right? Because they're plans, they're put on the shelf. Thank you very much. Was anybody trained to actually deal with the adversity of a crisis? Not enough. So I think the organizations that look at crises, pandemic, other, as something that is part and parcel of any organization's life cycle and have trained and organized themselves to it, then we'll be able to survive and manage this. So what skills do we need? We need decision making. This is not, let's have a meeting and consider consensus. You need, in a crisis, you need a more hierarchical decision making process. You need more command and control. Not only command and control, but you need that. You need a critical skill of stakeholder mapping. Most people think, oh, I've made my list of stakeholders. I've mapped my stakeholders. That's not mapping. That's just identifying the stakeholders. Most people need scenario planning. How much worse it's going to get. At the moment, there is such fatigue. 99% of organizations, except the ones that are really trained and have considered this properly, cannot imagine that it's going to get worse. Most people, even though the facts are telling us every day that it's probably going to get worse or it's not over, they are unable to plan for a worse and an escalation. And even if it doesn't happen, if you've planned for an escalation and you've put in place a strategy with that, you'll be much more resilient, both personally and as an organization. So I think it's critical to make the difference and consider it as a life jacket. You would never get on a plane if you knew there was no life jacket. You would never get on a boat if there was no life jacket. It's one of those things you hope you're never going to need, but if you do, you need to know how it works. You need to know that it functions, that it's in good shape, and that it's going to deploy, and that everybody's going to know how to use it. It's exactly that. Unfortunately, the problem is most organizations see this as a cost and not an investment. So let's hope that with this COVID pandemic, which everybody is impacted by, is going to make a few organizations think, oh my God, maybe we better spend some money on this. I would also like to point out that it's a lot easier for organizations to put business continuity plan and contingency plans in place because it's concrete, it's tangible. If you have a power cut, you do this. If you have a pandemic, you allow so many people working from home, this is what you're going to, it's concrete, it's tangible. How do you describe what a crisis team needs to do or management team needs to do when it moves into a crisis mode, unless people have been trained? It's much less tangible, and it's soft skills. A lot of it is soft skills. Those skills can be taught through training. So I think that's my message here.
Very comprehensive. Thank you, Caroline. We've ran well. Thank you so much for all the panelists for your passionate and invaluable input. It's been really good. We've got one last question. We've got around 5 minutes to field it in. Could I ask Michael to field it, and then can I ask each of the panelists after he's fielded it, if you can give us 1 or 2 key takeaways from its session, what they will be. Now, the question we're starting with is on communication, and is what are the key messages we should be providing to teams that will help to reassure them, and what's the best way of delivering these messages? So if we could start with Michael, and then please share any of the key takeaways we have with the team.
Thanks, Hugh. Let me first unpack what we mean by teams. To ensure the broadest learning for the audience of the webinar, I think we need to think about both internal and external stakeholders here. So this isn't just about reassuring our staff, but it's potentially about reassuring our partners and customers as well. I think it's really important, and it's been covered by others today, that there is a genuine commitment to two-way dialogue. Communications shouldn't be one way. It's not broadcasting. It's not just top down. There has to be that opportunity for dialogue and for feedback. And we as organizations can provide that framework. To pick up on Caroline's point, we need to map those stakeholders. We need to be able to, within that communications framework, nuance our communications for different audiences who perhaps have different needs, different fears, but also different preferences for the way they consume their media. So it might not be that an app works for everybody. It may be that others prefer those staff meetings or union meetings, one-to-ones. They might want the anonymity of a letter or an email, as well as the apps and newsletters. So both analog and digital is important. In terms of those messages, very briefly, I think we need to be clear about what is the same in our organizations, that we still have the same values, the same commitment to our customers and our partners and suppliers. We still have the same deadlines to meet, the same demands to meet. We will maintain the same standards of quality. We have the same duty of care to our staff. So what is the same? What has changed? So perhaps our working environment has changed. There's been adjustments to processes. There's certainly going to be changes in terms perhaps of PPE and of health and safety in the workplace, and in terms of managing people and managing large groups. I think there's then a provocation. Why are we asking you to return to the office rather than working from home? Talking about shared goals, contributing to company goals and targets, supporting efficiency, remaining viable and competitive within the marketplace. So I think it's really important that we treat our employees as grown-ups, that we're as transparent as we can be about why it's important for our organizations that we get back to what will be a new normal, of course, while still supporting that flexibility. Then I think you anticipate what the frequently asked questions will be. It's a great exercise to play devil's advocate, to play the difficult staff member, the heavily unionized employee, try and think about the questions, the challenges, the provocations, the complaints that they might have, and how might we respond to those. So that FAQs is a really important thing to model. And then my final point, which I mentioned earlier, is we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Let's make sure we're signposting our employees to existing values, policies, occupational health, PPE in the workplace, and we're signposting them to other partners, NHS, government advice, World Health Organizations, mental health support, whatever it might be. So they would be my takeaways. What's the same? What's changed? Why are we doing this? Frequently asked questions and signposting.
Thank you for that, Michael. And any key takeaway?
I think it's been great to hear all the different perspectives from everybody. I think there's some golden threads that have ran through all of this around preparation, around testing the policies and the plans that you have, around recognizing that employees and customers have different needs, different concerns and anxieties, and being able to be agile and make sure your plan and your communications can respond to different needs. There isn't a one size fits all. We're not flicking a switch here and say, okay, it's now safe, everybody get back to work. I think we have to maintain that agility and recognize that we're not going back to something, that we're very much in a very new environment and a new world.
Thank you so much. It's been great to meet you and talk to you.
I just wanted to add one thing to everything that Michael said, which is absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think what is important is that, you know, on the one hand, people will say, well, what do we say to our stakeholders to reassure them? On the one hand, you do want to make people feel safe, but there's no point in sugarcoating information. Our stakeholders, our employees are not children, they're grown-ups. So transparency, honesty is absolutely critical. Anytime that stakeholders start to smell some sort of sugarcoating or too smooth or too positive in a situation that is not that positive and is full of uncertainty once again, they're going to not trust it. And ultimately, the point about crisis is to retain stakeholder trust. If you don't have your stakeholder trust, you're not doing very well. So
That's
that would be my
very important. Thank you so much. Melissa?
Yeah, I think for me, two takeaways. Mental health and well-being would need to be the focus for everyone as we move forward, and we're not going back. So I like the moving forward, and if that's done exponentially. And second, just to take from, I think, what Caroline said in terms of crisis management needs to be viewed as an investment versus a cost. That one, I'm going to take that back, because, yeah, you know, how many companies have had business continuity plans or crisis management plans, but how prepared were we for this? And, you know, there's lots of data that says that we are going to continuously have these types of pandemics going forward, which ties into, you know, because of sustainability aspects, etc. So we have to build this capability across the board.
Thank you so much for your participation. Teresa, anything you'd like to add?
Really enjoyed the panel first and foremost, Hugh, so thank you very much for inviting me along. I think two things for me really, in terms of communication, learn the art of listening. It for me is really important. So there is an art to it. So listen, you have two of these, one of these, use them in that order, as my granddad used to tell me, and listen to what your people are telling you, because they know the answers. Your people know the answers, you don't have to. And then the second thing for me, second message for me is, as a leader, be mindful of the shadow that you're casting out there. Picking up on what Caroline said and what Robert said earlier, you know, if you as a leader expect behaviours from your people, certain behaviours, then you absolutely have to demonstrate them yourself. I was on a training course this morning, and somebody said, you know, as a leader, the standard that you can expect from your people is the lowest standard that you demonstrate yourself. And I think it's so true. So be mindful of the shadow you cast. It's broader and wider than you ever think.
Lovely, thank you. Rob?
For me, I think the big thing is leadership, teamwork. You know, utilize all aspects of the organisation. So that's HR, health and safety, quality. You know, all communicating together, all working as a team. But also engage people, show you care. I think the big thing we need to see from the leadership teams is show you care. And if you can get across to your workforce that you care, then I think they'll support you as much as they can as well. I think ultimately it's being agile and recognising that there is some opportunity out there as well. You know, we always talk about risk and we always see the liability, but sometimes there's some good opportunities. There's some really good talent available now that you know, if you're an organisation that is looking to recruit, there's some bloody good talent out there. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Caroline, anything further to add? Thank you, more than happy. Thank you. Anything further?
No, I think it's been great to be part of this panel with everybody's perspective, adding value. I hope attendees benefited from it. I certainly enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My panel, IIRSM, Claire, Holly, Suzanne, thank you so much. Audience, thank you for listening. I hope it's been worthwhile and useful. We do invite you along to our next 2 sessions, which are also going to be on Tuesdays in the next 2 months. Please, if you can, involve yourself, engage yourself, give us any questions, any concerns, any feedback you can. Remember, this is not our session, it's yours. The next session is going to be Tuesday the 15th of September at 9:30. So please stay safe and well. Thank you everybody for your inputs, really invaluable. I've made a copious amount of notes and I'll be watching the actual webinar avidly. So thank you so much. All stay safe and well and keep doing the great jobs that you're doing out there.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, everybody at IIRSM. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Bye-bye.
Thank you.